Grandpa tapped his fork against his glass until the whole table went quiet. Everyone turned to look. Turkey still steaming, rolls still warm, 14 people waiting to hear whatever came next. He smiled at my brother Tobias first, the way someone smiles at something they're proud of owning. "One grandchild is gold," he said. Tobias beamed, glowed with it. Then Grandpa turned to me, slow, deliberate, like he'd been saving this part. "And one is garbage." A few laughs sputtered out, panicked, obedient. The kind of laughter that fills space because silence feels more dangerous. My fingers went completely numb around my napkin. I stared at the cranberry sauce, not because it was interesting, but because if I looked up, I would cry. And if I cried, Grandpa would smile like he'd just proven something he'd always believed. He leaned back in his chair, fully satisfied. "Garbage belongs outside. But we're generous." My chest tightened so hard it hurt. My mom's hand found my knee under the table. She whispered, "Please don't react." And in my head, something snapped into place with a clarity I'd never felt before. They were asking me to swallow poison so the table could stay polite. My name is Rumi Calder. I learned early that my family loves me most when I'm silent, when I agree, when I make myself small enough to fit inside the story they're already telling. In Grandpa's bathroom, I gripped the edge of the sink, breathed through the sting behind my eyes, watched my reflection try not to break into pieces. From the dining room, I could still hear it. Tobias's voice, Grandpa's deep, satisfied laugh, silverware clinking normally like nothing had happened. My phone buzzed. "Dad, just let it go. He's old. Old. Like being old was a permission slip for cruelty. Like years on Earth made contempt acceptable." I wiped my face carefully, walked back out, sat down like nothing had happened at all. Grandpa watched me return. His eyes moved over me slowly. Then he smirked. He thought he'd won. He thought the moment had done its job. Reminded everyone of the hierarchy. Reminded me of my place. He had absolutely no idea what had shifted in me during those 3 minutes in that bathroom. I wasn't going to react tonight. I wasn't going to fight tonight. I was going to watch everything carefully. And then I was going to stop playing his game entirely. After dinner, Tobias cornered me in the hallway. His voice was low, almost kind, like he was doing me a favor. "Don't take it personally," he said. "Grandpa just has high standards." I looked at him carefully. "Calling me garbage is a high standard?" He shrugged, the ease of someone who had never once had to defend his right to exist in a room. "If you worked harder, maybe he'd see things differently." My stomach turned. I had worked 2 jobs for the past 3 years. I paid my mom's medical copays when she ran short. I'd skipped 2 vacations to keep our household bills current. Tobias didn't know any of that, had never asked. Because in this family, if the effort wasn't visible and impressive, it simply didn't exist. He patted my shoulder. Light, generous, like I was a charity project he'd found 5 minutes to acknowledge. Then he walked away. I stood in that hallway shaking. Not just from the insult, but from something deeper. Tobias wasn't just favored. He was carefully trained to believe the family's version of both of us. And he'd accepted the training completely. I found my grandmother Meryl in the kitchen, sitting alone, staring at her hands, not eating. Her eyes were wet, but her face was completely still. The expression of someone who had learned to hold grief so often it barely showed anymore. I sat beside her quietly. "Are you okay, Grandma?" She flinched slightly, like she'd forgotten she was allowed to be asked. "He didn't mean it," she whispered. Automatic. Words worn smooth from being said so many times. I took her hand. It was cold, much colder than the kitchen warranted. "Yes, he did," I said softly. Meryl's mouth trembled. "Don't make it worse," she whispered, voice barely there. "Please, sweetheart, please don't." I held her hand and didn't push, but something settled over me as I sat there. I'd assumed she was protecting Grandpa with those words, but I was looking at it wrong. She wasn't protecting him. She was protecting herself. She was protecting herself from what happened in that house when someone pushed back against him and lost. Whatever that cost looked like, she'd paid it enough times to know she didn't want to pay it again. And that made everything sadder and more urgent. The next morning, the family group chat lit up. My aunt sent a laughing emoji. Dad was on one last night. Can't take him anywhere. Like my public humiliation was a funny story, a quirky grandpa moment to giggle over with coffee. Tobias replied immediately. He tells it straight. Respect. Another aunt. He's just old school. You know how he is. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Because anything I wrote would be screenshotted and forwarded to Grandpa as evidence of my instability. Instead, I screenshot the entire thread. Saved it carefully, not to be petty. Not to collect ammunition for a dramatic confrontation somewhere down the road. But because I was done letting everyone rewrite this as normal. Every time something like this happened, the family performed a collective amnesia afterward. It became a joke. A quirk. Something sensitive people overreacted to. If they were going to rewrite my humiliation as humor, I was going to keep every single receipt. Every timestamp. Every laughing emoji. Every person who typed, "You know how he is," instead of, "That was wrong." I had a folder now. I started filling it that morning. 2 weeks later, Grandpa announced he was distributing a small trust to the grandchildren. For those who deserved it. The word deserved sat in my stomach like something rotten. At Sunday lunch, he produced an envelope for Tobias in front of everyone at the table. Made a ceremony of it. Patted Tobias on the shoulder as he handed it over. Tobias opened it, several $1,000s, for career development. Then Grandpa looked at me. "You'll receive yours," he said pleasantly, "when you've proven you're not the garbage I know you to be." The room went completely quiet. My mom's face tightened. I breathed slowly, kept my voice even. "What would you need me to do?" Grandpa's eyes lit up. He enjoyed this part. "Impress me," he said simply, like it was a fun challenge he was offering. I nodded, said nothing else. But I understood something clearly as I drove home. This wasn't generosity wrapped in conditions. This was control. He wasn't offering an opportunity. He was offering humiliation with a ribbon on it and waiting to see if I'd bow down to unwrap it. I wasn't going to bow. I drove home with fury sitting under my ribs like fire in a sealed jar, contained, pressing, impossible to ignore. My best friend Yara listened to everything. She was quiet the whole time, which was unusual for her. She waited until I'd said every single word. Then she said one sentence. "If you keep proving yourself to a man who needs you small, you'll be proving yourself forever." I sat with that for a long time. "Then what do I do?" I finally asked. "You stop auditioning," she said. "You start building." I went home, opened a fresh folder on my laptop, named it Family, Timeline, started writing. Every comment I could remember, every incident, every date. The trust distribution scene from today with exact quotes, the Thanksgiving toast, the group chat messages, all of it, organized chronologically, clean, factual, unemotional, just the events as they happened. Something about the act of writing it down changed the feeling inside my chest. It stopped being a wound I was carrying privately and started being a record that existed outside me. That felt different. That felt like the beginning of something I could actually use. Meryl called me quietly on a Tuesday afternoon. Asked if I could come by when Grandpa was at his monthly card game. When I arrived, she was sitting in the living room alone, hands in her lap, voice already trembling before I'd even sat down. "He's angry," she whispered. "He said I was looking at him wrong at dinner." Looking at him wrong. I kept my expression steady even as my chest tightened. She pulled out her checkbook, held it toward me with both hands. "I don't understand the accounts anymore," she admitted. "He handles all of it now. I try to ask questions, and he tells me I'm confused." I looked at the checkbook, pages of entries in handwriting I didn't recognize. Then I noticed the kitchen drawer. Slightly open, a stack of bank statements inside, neatly organized, all opened, all filed, by him. Meryl watched my face and whispered, "Don't let him know I showed you." I looked at her carefully. Everything I'd understood about this situation shifted. Grandpa wasn't just bullying with words at dinner tables, he was controlling with money. Quietly, systematically. For what appeared to be a very long time. I stayed late at Meryl's to help her organize some documents she'd asked about. Grandpa came home earlier than expected. I heard his voice in the back hallway, on his phone. The office door cracked just enough. I stood still. "Yes, Tobias is the heir," he was saying, proud, certain, like reading a fact from a document he'd written himself. "The other one, she's just a liability." My hands went cold. He laughed. Relaxed. Comfortable. "Meryl doesn't need the details. She gets confused about these things anyway." Confused. He was actively framing his own wife as incompetent to justify why she wasn't involved in decisions about their shared finances. I backed away from the hallway silently. Heart slamming, breath very shallow. I'd spent years thinking Grandpa was simply cruel, unkind, a man with sharp edges he never bothered to soften. But this was something else. This was deliberate. He was building a structure, a narrative, a wall of language around Meryl that made her easier to control and harder for anyone outside to help. I drove home slowly and started researching elder financial abuse that same evening. I convinced Meryl to attend what I framed as a retirement planning consultation. Just helpful information, I told her, nothing scary. The financial counselor's name was Jules Arnett, patient, precise, good at asking questions in ways that felt safe. Meryl's answers were hesitant, apologetic. She second-guessed herself repeatedly, corrected her own statements before Jules even responded. Grandpa had trained her to believe her own memory wasn't trustworthy. Jules reviewed the bank statements Meryl had brought, reviewed them twice. Then Jules set them down carefully. There are transfers here that don't correspond to your household expenses, Jules said. Voice neutral, professional, careful not to alarm. Meryl's face went pale. What does that mean? Jules looked at me. It means we need to understand where certain funds are going, and why. I kept my expression steady, but inside, something heavy and cold settled into place. I had come here thinking Grandpa was emotionally abusive and controlling. I hadn't considered that the abuse might extend into something with legal implications, something that could be documented, challenged, stopped, not just witnessed and survived, actually stopped. Tobias arrived at family brunch the following Sunday in a brand new car. He tossed the keys lightly as he walked through the door, like he was in a commercial for something expensive and effortless. Grandpa wanted me safe on the road, he said, grinning. Everyone gathered around, asked questions, admired the color. Grandpa put his hand on Tobias's shoulder and looked genuinely proud. I watched Meryl's face across the room. She was smiling, tight, distant, her eyes not quite meeting anyone else's. Later, in the kitchen alone together, she leaned close and whispered, "He told me last month we couldn't afford to fix the roof." She said it quietly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to say it out loud. I looked at her. The roof had been leaking for 2 months. She'd mentioned it carefully, apologetically, like it was an inconvenience she was embarrassed to have. We couldn't fix the roof. But Tobias was driving a new car. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This wasn't a grandparent being unfair in the ordinary way grandparents were sometimes unfair. This was tangible, structural. Something was being taken from Meryl and given elsewhere. Over the next 2 weeks, relatives started calling me with strange concern. "Are you doing okay?" my aunt asked. Too carefully. "A cousin, I heard you've been going through a hard time." Another, "Are you getting support from anyone?" The tone was practiced, rehearsed. The concern didn't feel genuine, it felt delivered. Grandpa was working ahead, planting the narrative before any confrontation could arrive. If I ever challenged him, spoke up, showed anyone the documents or Jules's concerns, the groundwork was being laid for the response. "She's unstable. She's confused. She's always been the difficult one. You know how Rumi is." Yara told me to stay calm. "Let them underestimate you," she said. "Underestimated people move more freely." That night, a text came from Tobias. "Grandpa says you've been confusing Grandma about her accounts. Stop it." Confuse. That word again. Grandpa's favorite tool for discrediting anyone who got too close to the truth. My blood went cold as I read it. He was setting me up as the villain in the story of me trying to protect the one person in the family who actually needed it. Meryl called me 2 days later, voice barely above a whisper, shaking. "Come when you can." I went the next morning. She met me at the door looking pale. "He took my cards," she said. "He said I was spending incorrectly, and he needed to manage things more carefully." I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer she pointed toward. Her debit card was inside, cut in half. I stared at it, felt rage move through me in a slow, hot wave. Meryl stood behind me and started crying. Quietly, apologizing as she cried, saying sorry to me for crying, sorry for the trouble, sorry for being upset. She was apologizing for her own pain. I turned and hugged her, held her until the shaking slowed. Then I noticed something else in the back of the drawer. A letter from a bank, labeled as account restructuring. dated 5 months ago. I picked it up, read it carefully. This wasn't a recent decision. This wasn't reactive. Grandpa had been planning the financial restructuring for at least 5 months before Meryl's card was cut. He'd been building this for a long time. I called Grandpa that evening, kept my voice completely level, steady, no anger in it. "Give Grandma her cards back," I said. Silence, long enough to be deliberate. Then his voice, cold, lightly amused, like I'd said something mildly entertaining. "Or what? Garbage giving orders now?" The word hit even through the phone. I swallowed hard, kept my breathing even. "Or I'll involve outside help," I said, "professional help." He laughed, full and rich, the laugh of someone who believed completely that they were untouchable. "Nobody is going to believe you. You're the problem. You've always been the problem. I made sure of that. Made sure of that." He'd said it himself, without hesitation, because he assumed I had no power and no audience. "We'll see," I said. I hung up, sat on my kitchen floor for a while afterward. My hands were shaking, my stomach was sick, but underneath the shaking and the sickness, something else was there, something I hadn't felt before in a conflict with Grandpa. Relief. Like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath for years. My mom called me frantic the next morning. "What did you say to Grandpa? He's furious and calling everyone." Furious, like his anger was my responsibility to manage. That night, the family gathered at my uncle's house for what they called an intervention. For me, I walked in and found them arranged in a loose circle. My mom, 2 aunts, an uncle. Tobias sitting at the edge with his arms crossed. "You're creating tension," my uncle said. "You've always been sensitive about things," and Aunt offered. Kindly. Like sensitivity was a medical condition. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Mom said. Her voice was tired, not cruel, just tired in a way that showed how long she'd been managing peace instead of choosing truth. Grandpa wasn't there. He didn't need to be. His control arrived in rooms without him. I looked at their faces for a long moment. I understood the trap completely. If I defended myself, I was dramatic. If I stayed quiet, I was accepting guilt. So I did something new. I stood up. Said calmly, "I'm protecting my grandmother. If that makes me the problem to this family, then so be it." I walked out, heard Mom whisper behind me as the door closed. "She's getting worse." Worse. Like telling the truth was a symptom. Meryl called me that evening. Voice tiny, like she was calling from very far away. "I'm sorry they yelled at you." I pressed the phone closer. "They didn't yell, Grandma. They performed." Meryl was quiet. "I'm just so tired," she whispered. The words broke something open in my chest, not because she was giving up, but because she'd been tired for so long. "Then we changed things," I said. "We actually changed them. Jules helped us set up a new bank account. In Meryl's name only, with proper oversight and safeguards. No secondary access without her written consent." Meryl's hands trembled while she signed the forms. She looked up at one point, pen hovering, eyes uncertain. "Am I allowed to do this?" she asked. I had to stop myself from crying when she said it. "Yes," I said, "absolutely yes." We finished the paperwork. On the drive home, I kept thinking about that question. Am I allowed to do this? A woman in her late 70s, her own money, her own name, asking if she was allowed. That question told me everything about how deep this had gone, and how long it had been this way. Grandpa showed up at Meryl's house 3 days later, unannounced. I was there. He walked in without knocking. Like entering was something he was entitled to regardless of whether he'd been invited. His eyes swept the room. "Found me. What have you done?" He directed the question at Meryl but kept his eyes on me. Meryl shrank back. Her whole body tightened. I stepped forward, kept my voice calm. "We've been organizing Grandma's finances." His face twisted. "You're stealing." Flat. Certain. Like he'd already decided. Meryl flinched. He pointed at me. "Garbage with ambition. That's what you are now." I held his gaze. "Leave." He laughed. "This is my house." Meryl's voice came then, barely audible but present, real. "No," she said, "it's ours." Grandpa froze. A half-second of genuine surprise crossed his face. Surprise that she'd spoken, that the words had come out of her mouth steady. Then his face went hard. He turned, walked out. The door slammed so hard the walls shook. Meryl started trembling, but she was also smiling. Small, real. Because for the first time in longer than I could know, she had spoken back. Tobias texted me 2 days later. "Grandpa is rewriting the will. He says you're not getting anything." I read the message twice. My first reaction wasn't fear. My stomach flipped, but not from panic. I'd already assumed I wasn't in Grandpa's will. That had never been the point. What scared me was the timing. Not the fact that he was rewriting it, but that he was rewriting it now. Urgently, as a response to feeling threatened. When I told Jules, Jules was quiet for a moment. People who rush to change wills, Jules said carefully, are either planning or panicking. Right now, your grandfather is panicking. I looked at Meryl across the room, folding laundry with small, careful movements, hands still trembling slightly. This had never been about inheritance for me. Not once. This was about Meryl living her remaining years without fear, without asking permission to access her own money, without being told her memory was failing when it wasn't. But I couldn't ignore what Jules had said. Wills were power, and Grandpa was about to swing that power like a weapon, which meant we needed to move more carefully and faster. Tobias called me unexpectedly on a Wednesday night. His voice was tense in a way I hadn't heard before. The comfortable ease was gone. "What exactly are you doing?" he asked. "Helping Grandma," I said simply. He exhaled sharply. "Grandpa says you're trying to turn her against the family." "The family," I repeated carefully. "You mean Grandpa?" Silence. I asked quietly, "Do you know where the money for your new car actually came from?" His tone sharpened instantly. "Don't answer me, Tobias." "Grandpa said it was from investments." His voice was less certain now. "Grandma told me she couldn't afford to fix her roof," I said. "The same month you got that car." Silence stretched. Long and uncomfortable. "That's not my problem," Tobias finally said. The cruelty in those words hit me harder than I expected. Then, quieter, almost to himself, "I can't lose Grandpa's support. I need it." And suddenly I saw Tobias differently. Not as the golden chosen one who knew everything and chose to look away, but as someone chained with a much nicer collar than mine. Still chained, still unable to speak without permission. Jules found something during a deeper financial review. Significant funds. Multiple transfers flowing into an account connected to a business entity labeled as consulting services. The entity traced back to someone closely connected to Grandpa's finances. Jules's face was carefully controlled when explaining it, but her eyes said what her professional language didn't. We brought everything to an attorney named Saffron Hale. She specialized in elder financial abuse cases. Her office was quiet. Her manner was precise. She reviewed every document Jules provided, asked clinical, organized questions, took notes without visible reaction. "We can petition for an independent financial review," Saffron said, "but you should understand the family reaction will be intense." I laughed once. Short. Involuntary. "They already held an intervention for me." Saffron nodded. "Then we proceed carefully and thoroughly." I left her office with the late afternoon sun hitting the parking lot hard. My phone buzzed. "Mom, Grandpa says you're trying to destroy this family." I stared at the message for a long time. No, I thought. I'm trying to save the only person in it who ever loved, quietly, without keeping score, without conditions, without calling anyone garbage. Grandpa announced a special early Thanksgiving dinner 2 weeks later. He insisted Meryl attend, asked Tobias to prepare a few words, framed it as a celebration of family. My skin crawled. I recognized it immediately. Another staged event, another opportunity for Grandpa to control the room, to establish the narrative publicly before any official process could challenge it. Saffron advised, "Go calm. Stay close to your grandmother. Document everything you can." Yara offered to come with me. I decided to go alone, because Grandpa's favorite framing was that outsiders had poisoned me, that I was being manipulated by people who didn't love this family the way he did. I wouldn't give him that. I drove to the house alone. Walked in. Grandpa was near the door. He smiled when he saw me. Wide. Theatrical. "Garbage came back," he announced to the room. Nervous laughter. Familiar. Pavlovian. Meryl found my hand immediately. Her grip was tight. I leaned close and whispered, "We're okay." But my heart was hammering, because I'd noticed something in the hallway. Grandpa's study door was partially open, and I could hear voices inside. I slipped away from the dining room, moved toward the study quietly. The door was cracked, 4 inches. Grandpa's voice was low, but clear. "After tonight we lock everything down," he said. "The documentation I have shows your grandmother is confused. The attorney will agree." My stomach flipped completely over. Tobias's voice uncertain. What about Rumi? Grandpa snorted. She's nothing, a mistake, garbage. I held my breath. My phone was already in my hand. I opened the voice recorder silently. If she pushes against us, Grandpa continued, we say she's unstable. We say she's always been difficult and now she's making things up. That narrative is already established. Already established. He'd been building it for years. Tobias was quiet. Grandpa's voice lowered further. Nobody listens to garbage. We remind them of that. I stood frozen, completely still, recording every word. Then I backed away silently, rejoined the dining room, sat in my chair. Grandpa emerged from the hallway moments later, smiling, picking up his fork, clinked his glass. The table quieted. He stood up slowly, and I knew exactly what was coming next. And this time, I was ready for it. Grandpa announced Tobias as the future of the family, praised him in detail, described specific achievements with pride. Then he turned his eyes to me. And you, he said, warm, almost affectionate. Garbage should learn from gold. Laughter stuttered through the room. Automatic, nervous. I stood up. The laughter stopped. Everyone looked at me, surprised that I was moving, surprised that I wasn't folding. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I kept my voice completely steady. Grandpa, you have been calling me garbage for years, in front of family, in front of strangers, at every table where you had an audience. Tonight I'm done letting you teach everyone here that love is a ranking system. His eyes narrowed. Sit down, Rumi. I looked at Meryl, saw her watching me with something raw and bright in her expression, looked back at Grandpa. No. Murmuring moved through the table. You told Tobias 30 minutes ago in your study that Grandma is confused, that you'll lock everything down, that an attorney will agree, that if I speak up, you'll say I'm unstable. Total silence fell. Grandpa's smile died completely. Tobias's face drained of all color. I recorded it, I said. Do you want to hear it? I didn't blast the recording dramatically. I played it quietly, just loud enough for the table to hear. Grandpa's voice in his own words. Your grandmother is confused. The attorney will agree. Say she's unstable, already established. The sound was small, but it filled the room completely, like smoke filling every corner of a space. My aunt covered her mouth with both hands. Mom whispered, Dad, like she was seeing him for the first time, like the version she'd believed in her whole life was dissolving right in front of her. Grandpa moved toward me, arm extended, reaching for my phone. Tobias stepped between us. I watched it happen. Watched Tobias put himself physically between Grandpa and me. Grandpa, Tobias said, voice cracking. Stop. Grandpa's eyes flashed with rage. Move. No, Tobias said, quiet, shaking, but not moving. Meryl stood up from her chair, slowly, carefully, her whole body trembling. I am not confused, she said. Her voice was thin, but it was in the room, present, real, undeniable. I am frightened, she said. There is a difference. The table was absolutely silent. Grandpa looked around the room, at face after face that wasn't laughing, wasn't nodding, wasn't giving him the obedience he needed. His power had always required silence, and silence had just broken completely. Weeks later, the Independent Financial Review confirmed what Jules had found. Significant and systematic mismanagement of joint funds. Transfers to outside accounts without Meryl's knowledge or consent. Grandpa's access to Meryl's accounts was legally restricted, pending the full review. Meryl updated her estate plans with proper oversight. An independent advocate assigned, everything documented. Tobias lost his comfortable shine for a while. Not because we punished him, but because he had to sit with what he'd accepted, what he'd participated in, by staying quiet. He showed up at my door one evening, eyes red, shoulders low. I didn't know how to be anything other than what he wanted, he said. Start by being honest, I told him. That's the beginning. Mom started therapy, real therapy. And one afternoon she called me and said, voice halting, I'm sorry, Rumi. I'm sorry I told you to swallow it. I'm sorry I asked you to keep the peace instead of demanding he keep his decency. I cried then, not from humiliation, from relief. The next Thanksgiving, we didn't go to Grandpa's house. We hosted at Meryl's, small, warm, quiet laughter, no toasts ranking people. No cruelty wrapped in humor. Meryl raised her glass and said simply, to love that doesn't keep score. I looked around that table and understood everything. I hadn't just defended myself. I had changed what the next generation would learn about what family was allowed to mean.